Welcome. We're going to be doing this is the second one, yeah, the UC Training Grants Consortium. I'm Jill Van Pola, kind of your meeting facilitator, I guess. So I just wanted to let you know some, I guess, updates from our first initial meeting. And if you could, as I'm talking, as we're getting started, as you're logging on, if you could just like write your name in the chat with your title and your campus, I'd appreciate it, because we keep the chat for later and it's good to know how many people were attending from each campus. So one update on our executive team. So we have Robin, I'm going to butcher your last name. Ferrari. I don't see.
Faria.
Okay. And Kelly Lozo, from UCLA. I'm from UCSD, and Holly Wright is sick today. She's also from UCSD, and we did recruit Yerga. There's another tough last name, Maharana from UCI. She's also out sick at the doctor's, so she's not able to make it today. And then we also have Rachel Reeves on our executive team now from UC Davis. So we're still looking for maybe a couple more executive team members from other campuses. So if you're from UCSF or Berkeley, let us know if you're interested in joining on something like that. So we're going to kind of just go through like updates from the last meeting. We have an update on the chancellor's letter, or the UCOP letter we were writing. And I'm going to let, I think I'm going to let Robin take it from here. She also did a presentation to UC Braid yesterday. Nope, I'm sorry, Friday. And so she can kind of give us an update and kind of segue into the letter. So I'll go ahead and let Robin take it from here.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So yeah, I got the chance to meet with the UC Braid leadership last Friday during one of their monthly calls to present the idea of this consortium to them. I'd previously met with the CAO team and they were very supportive. And so they had recommended that I present to the leadership group, which is, some of you may know, but it's essentially made up of the PIs and other leadership of the CTSAs that make up the UC Braid consortium. So one of the reasons we had thought to present to them is because they are always looking to take on projects that really address challenges that are shared across the UC research spectrum. So this seemed like something that really fit right within their interest because it's research. We all have very similar struggles, and we've done a lot of work together to kind of come up with an idea of like what those challenges are, what potential solutions are. And to have engagement from UC Braid would be helpful because their leadership, many of them also are PIs of trading grants themselves, but also UC Braid may be able to also help provide funding or other kinds of resources to help us with our initiatives. So one of the things that came out of that call was specifically they wanted to help us with the letter that we had discussed last week that Jill had taken the lead on drafting. So we have we've been receiving and incorporating feedback, but for next steps, what I'm going to do is meet with Elizabeth Boyd, who's the director of UC Braid, and she's already aware that we were working on this letter, but she's going to help direct us into how appropriately approach UCOP, kind of what the rules are about doing that, how to do it in a way that gets the right audience, and then also we can talk through and strategize how we might use a similar letter like that to propose to maybe our individual UC chancellors, maybe to the NIH, just taking this letter and being able to put it in front of different audiences for maximum impact. So for that letter, it's still very much a draft in progress. I don't think it's anywhere near final quite yet, but I would love to hear from you guys about I think examples of the challenges that you're facing at your sites and maybe some of the proposed solutions that your sites have come up with, and then how well or not well those are working for you. So one of the examples we had was UCSD's 10% salary coverage to their PIs, which is helpful, but only in limited circumstances. So I think being able to provide really specific information in this letter is going to help really hone in on those areas that we'd like to ask support for from UCOP. And so, and UC Braid will help us get that refined as well. Um, so then I guess the last thing is one of the things that we really presented them was all of the issues that we've sort of collectively brought up that we share, and they were really interested in asking us for a specific scope of work. So I think they're looking for, what do we really want? Like if they were going to give us funding, what would it cover? How much would it be? So working on a preliminary budget like that, I think will be the next step to presenting to UC Braid, because, they could help us develop that shared website that Jill's been plugging away at, maybe some dedicated time to a resource administrator who could help coordinate all of our efforts, all those kinds of things. So I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I didn't want to take up any more time because I know the next presentation is kind of lengthy.
I guess, yeah, I mean, there might be somebody on the line here that wasn't on the first meeting, so I guess we should kind of go over maybe like what kind of letter we were writing. Basically, it was like a persuasive letter to President Drake. I think we talk about going to the chancellors possibly first, and then Drake, and then it's basically we're just asking for more funds for financial support for the institutional training grants, whether it's money, extra money for top off or whatever you guys want to call it, or PI admin support, stuff like that. So that was kind of the reasoning of why we thought the letter was really important, especially with all the UAW changes. So anything else, Robin?
I think that's it from my end.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just finding, I was really enthusiastic at the last initial meeting, and then I'm like, oh, there's bureaucracy. More bureaucracy than I thought. So the website, I did this website on Google Sites, and it was just closed to UCSD, and I'm going through back and forth for them to open it to all the UC schools. So anyway, I'm in the process of doing that. So I really wanted to launch that before this meeting, but unfortunately it just hasn't happened yet. So that is something else that's kind of in the works and stuck in bureaucracy. Yeah, I think oh, I do want to mention, I was able to make some really good connections with people through the office hours I do on Thursday. And we had someone I know from UCSF came in, and I didn't know the answer to her. She had a post-award UC Path question. And it was kind of cool because I was able to connect her with the right people, and she was very siloed. You could tell she was, new in her position, but we were able to make the connection, which was great, with someone at UCLA and saying, hey, do you know how to do this? And they said, sure. So it was like, that was a win for this group. And I have another example of somebody else from UCSF. She's like, can you help me with this? I said, sure. And so again, it was able to someone that was extremely siloed, new to a position, didn't know how to do the RPPR, and then she was able to get help. So, they're two very small things, but I think it's a good start. And so the letter, I tend to get impatient. I thought we'd be farther along in the letter at this point, but we're not. That's okay. It's coming along. So really the main topic today, the main meeting of for today's discussion, the meat of the meeting is to talk with Elizabeth Jensen about the pre-doc stipends in UC Path. And so that is something our campus has not been done very well, is communicate these issues. And Elizabeth is definitely on the pulse of that. So I'm going to go ahead and let Elizabeth share her screen and take as long as you need, Elizabeth. So.
Okay, thanks, Jill. Let me just bring this up. It's a kind of a multifaceted issue with the predoctoral stipends. And I'm going to do my best to, can everybody see that? Okay, I'm going to do my best to try and break this down into the separate components and be as concise and clear as possible because it is a bit complicated. And then I've got, you know, some thoughts and items for discussion at the end and questions. But if you have any questions about anything as I'm going along, feel free to ask as well. All right, so I'm going to start out with the terms and conditions of the T32 training grants from the NIH grants policy statement. And these slides we can send out to everybody afterwards. I'll give them to Jill. And I've linked all of the specific sections in these slides for everybody. So first, under allowable and unallowable costs, NIH is very specific and says that the stipend is not salary and it is not provided as a condition of employment with either the federal government or the recipient organization. And then further breaking it down, trainees are generally supported for 12-month training appointments for which they receive stipend as a subsistence allowance to help defray the costs, defray living expenses during the research training experience. The stipend is not salary and is not provided as a condition of employment with either the federal government or recipient organization. Stipends must be paid in accordance with established stipend levels. No departure from the standard stipend provided by NIH under the grant may be negotiated by the recipient organization with the trainees. The stipend amounts may be adjusted only at the time of appointment or reappointment. For appointments of less than 12 months, the stipend will be prorated. So that right there is very clear. And then the next part is with regards to stipend supplementation. Recipients may supplement stipends from non-federal funds, provided that the supplementation is without any additional obligation for the trainee. So an organization can determine the amount of the stipend supplementation, if any, will be provided according to our own policies. The policies must be consistently applied. Federal funds may not be used for stipend supplementation unless specifically authorized under the terms of the program from which the funds are derived. Any individual may use federal education loan funds or VA benefits when permitted. Under no circumstances may PHS funds be used for supplementation. So as you can see, NIH is very clear that stipends are stipends, they're not employment. And if you're going to supplement the stipends, it cannot be without, it has to be without any additional obligation, which means it can't be for employment, nor can you supplement the stipend using other federal awards. So that is a very important thing to take into consideration. Now, when it comes to employment, NIH in this section under compensation and other income states that students may seek part-time employment coincidental to their training program to further offset their expenses. Fellows and trainees may spend on average an additional 25% of their time in part-time research, teaching, or clinical employment. So this is basically saying that your students can have employment up to 25% in addition to their stipend, but it is not tied to the stipend. And it cannot be related to the subject of the training grant as well. So I know different organizations, some don't allow the students to be employed at all on our campus. We are allowing the 25% because we have students who have TA requirements, you know, different things like that. I won't go through this whole entire compensation because that's a lot to read out. Okay, so I just put in the slides here. That now brings us onto the UAW contract. I provided the links in the slide for when you get them if you're curious and want to go look at the labor contract in depth. So the first article in the UAW contract outlines exactly what a graduate student researcher is under the category of employees. A graduate student who performs research as a condition of receiving financial remuneration from funding generated by the university in an academic department or research unit, provided that the graduate student is performing this funded research under the control of the university and under the specific direction of a faculty member or authorized principal investigator. Now, sorry, I'm not looking at the chat.
So the question was, can compensation be from federal funds? So for pre-docs, it's my understanding that they can, well, our guidance at UCSD is they're no longer supposed to be from federal funds, even if it's not in conflict with because it used to be, the policy exactly states that if as long as it doesn't support the same research. But even though that it says that, they're not supposed to be, our guidance now at UCSD is no, you're not supposed to. Now for postdocs, which is different, we're talking about GSRs here. So, but postdocs are exempt, and I'm told they can be supplemented from federal funds. But you have to understand, like, also remember, supplementation is different than compensation. So
yes, and that's what
I think that's where it gets very confused.
This is where it's a big problem. So they can be employed on other federal grants up to the 25% for the coincidental employment. You cannot use other federal funds for supplementation, and the supplementation cannot be tied to employment. That is a quid pro quo. That is saying that they are obligated to produce something as an employee. The whole entire postdoc issue, I have not delved into that greatly. There is also the possibility that we have not been complying with postdoc regulations either. But again, I'm just really focused on this because we don't have any T32 training grants on our campus for postdocs. Yeah. So, oops, sorry, I skipped that. So the second part of this article of recognition, after it defines the graduate student researcher, states what a trainee is. And here's one of the kickers. It says, where the graduate student meets the terms identified in section B1A, which is the definition of a graduate student researcher, and the funding source from which they receive the remuneration deems that the money provided cannot be characterized as wages, the graduate student is an employee. And the university will place the graduate student in a new trainee title code that reflects that the money provided is not subject to a W-2. So this is kind of a little bit problematic on a couple of different levels, because like the federal labor standards and the IRS kind of have very specific definitions of what an employee is and what an employee isn't. And in this definition right here, they're saying they are an employee, but they're not going to receive a W-2. Again, I'm not super concerned with that part. That is a tax issue and a labor standards issue. But what we are more concerned about is that they may not be necessarily considered a trainee if they don't even meet the GSR definition. And so we have argued that trainees are receiving a stipend not for employment. They are not doing research or a product for financial remuneration, and therefore they actually don't even meet the qualifications to be considered a trainee and put into these specific job codes. And these were the initial job codes that they came out with that go into UC Path as, quote, trainees. So then following on, and this is, again, another part of the issue, graduate student researchers and trainees, we are required to provide them with a written notice of appointment. It's a contract of employment. It has the name, the appointment title, their percentages, their effective start and end date, the salary, wages, stipends, personal time off, tuition and fees, hiring unit, hiring contact, a description of the required work duties, the name of the faculty member for whom the GSR will report, the work site, and response requirements. They have to, some of these, I mean, are just, access to all gender restrooms, lactation support, if they become disabled, a statement that the position is covered under the collective bargaining agreement between the parties, any applicable new GSR orientations, a statement that the GSR will have an employment file and that the new material may be added to it over the course of their employment and how to access the file, a statement of the name and department address of all GSRs as it relates to the UAW, a link to the UAW website, and a direct link to the UAW website containing the membership election form. And so as you can see, even though they're calling them trainees and saying that they're not employees, they are requiring us to give them an employment contract, which again is also going against the terms and conditions of the NIH award. However, the contract is also a bit contradictory, and there are some exceptions. So under appointment of security, they say that the provisions of the article do not apply to trainees and fellows who fail to meet a requirement set by their funding agency, which causes the funding agency to cancel the trainee/fellows funding. The previous wording was saying that if a GSR is suddenly, the PI cannot support them anymore, everything like that, then we will find alternate employment and cover their costs. But then it's saying that trainees and fellows, if the training if the agency cancels their funding, they're out of luck, which is interesting. They're not covered the same way. And then again, they also say that they are employees. However, they must comply with program requirements and may not be eligible to participate in the deferred compensation plan and university retirement plans. Again, they're calling them employees, but then saying, but not really. Leaves, trainees and fellows, any paid leaves provided to a GSR through a training grant or external fellowship that provides equivalent or more generous paid leave benefits shall satisfy the requirements. Any paid leaves provided through a training grant or external fellowship shall be deducted from the paid leave allocation set forth in the article on paid leave. If the training grant or external fellowship does not provide for paid leaves, trainees and fellows will be provided the paid leaves. Again, they are not employees, they are paid via stipend. They should not be required to report time off. That is a direct contradiction of the purpose of a stipend. Stipend is not for employment. They are not supposed to be recording their time or completing time cards for their traineeship. It is that exactly, a traineeship. And then, last but not least, under time and effort commitment, it says for trainees and fellows, the language in this article is not intended to supersede the language of the applicable grant or fellowship, which may require different levels of effort. So they do say in the contract, buried, that the contract is not intended to supersede the applicable grant or fellowship. All right, so now this brings us to the third part of this ball of wax, which is the implementation of the GSR and trainees in UC Path. And this is where it all kind of comes together. And this is how we kind of fell down the rabbit hole of what was actually going on with our campus. Because when they sent out the guidance of you're going to be putting them into UC Path as trainees, but they're employees, but they're not receiving a W-2. But then you have to do this supplemental position, which right now we use our internal program called GradPoint Financial, where we allocate the difference in their stipend to bring them up to the step of the GSR that we pay our students at. So effective October 1st, 23, when extramural agencies establish stipends at a rate less than the university established wage minimum and the campus elects to proceed with the appointment of a GSR, the campus shall provide additional funding to increase the wage to the next highest salary point on the GSR scale if applicable. The university shall create a job code to provide a supplemental GSR appointment to provide the additional funding. Trainees and fellows shall also be eligible for experience-based progression pursuant to above. Now, again, this on its surface doesn't sound so bad, but the instructions for UC Path, if the trainee payment follows below the GSR salary requirement, 2 records are input into UC Path. One for the GSR fellowship or traineeship position, and one for the supplement position. The department is to work with GradDiv on the amounts and calculate the FTE associated with the supplement appointment. The trainee fellowship appointment position will have an FTE assigned so that the combined appointments equal 50%. So they are having us back in and adjust the FTE of their supplement, which is for employment, versus their traineeship to hit an even 50%. Which means that for different trainees, depending on what department they're in or what salary step they are, for the same traineeship may have different FTE allocations for the traineeship versus their employment. So it's not going to be equal, even though they're all in the same appointment or in the same program for the trainee. But here's where we figured it out. Our campus, I don't know what other campuses were telling people, but they were just like, oh, hey, no, it's just a placeholder, like a postdoc paid direct. They won't be considered employees. We're not going to do a W-2, but you cannot supplement them without going through UC Path. You have to use this special GSR supplement code. This GSR supplement code, the comp rate code is UC annual. That is specifically for wages and for employment. And when I saw that, I questioned them and I said, well, this looks like that's for employment. This isn't just a supplement to a stipend. It's not a continuation of their stipend. And they said, yeah, no, it is for wages. It is for employment. So again, that is a direct contradiction of the requirements of the training grants. You cannot supplement them through employment. And then we also have the slight problem of, oops, and this is not really with regard to the guidelines, but we're going to have a problem because they've only created 2 types of positions anyways. So the GSR trainee or fellowship with no tuition and fee remission, or the GSR trainee and fellow with tuition and fee remission. And as everybody knows on here, the GSHIP and the tuition and fees are capped at like the 60% and then, you know, the fixed rate. So our system won't be able to do that. So we would have to choose trainee with no tuition and fee remission, and then we would have to pay them through another system to make sure that the correct amount of tuition and fees and health insurance gets paid. So that's also a bit of a conundrum there. So my question to you, this is, you know, items to consider is, do our trainees meet the definition of a GSR? On our campus, we are taking the stance that none of our student trainees meet this criteria. They are not receiving the financial remuneration for performing funded research. They are trainees, and they are not being asked to produce a product in return for their funds. They are being paid a stipend. Again, it says that they only meet the definition for a trainee if they meet the definition of a GSR. Therefore, we're saying that the requirement in the contract should not apply since our trainees do not meet that definition. Therefore, they would not need to go into UC Path and not be considered employees. And then again, as I've said repeatedly, the GSR supplement code that they're saying that we must use for trainees is for wages, direct violation. And then requiring us to provide an appointment letter to the trainee for both the traineeship and their supplemental employment is placing employment requirements on the student. On a completely different aside, I was speaking with somebody who is a doctor, and he said that when he was going to med school, they were doing this very similar thing where they were considering them employees sometimes, not other times, students sometimes. And his institution got into big trouble with the IRS. And he said 5 years later, he got a check in the mail for things that were taken out of his paychecks that should not have happened because he was a student. Again, that's anecdotal, but these are the main problems that we have with this. We were given a list. I don't know about other campuses. Originally in the GSR contract, they had a list of specific types of awards. And if any student was on that, they were immediately categorized as a GSR trainee. Now, they took that out of the contract, but our campus is still sending out correspondence that lists all of those awards. UCOP did not check with the federal funding agencies. It's very obvious. One of the big telltale signs of that is on that list are NIH D grants. Does anybody here know what a D grant is? D training grant? I didn't either. So I went and I looked it up when that list initially came out. A D award should never have been on that list. Yes, it's a training grant, but it is specifically for countries outside of the United States with low to middle income to train people of those countries, citizens of those countries.
Oh, so you mean like a D43?
Yeah.
An international training grant. Okay, yes.
Exactly.
Okay. We've had a couple, we've had one or two in the past, and we don't currently have one. Okay.
Okay. So yes, you're like the D43. Well, one of them that was on the list is actually the pre-planning to it's funds to for planning of a D43. So again, it's not even actually a training grant. There would never be anybody on that type of award that would ever fall under the category of a GSR. And then with the D43, as you know, it is for international training grants. And again, none of those people that were supported on stipends would ever fall under this term because they're international citizens of another country in that country. They just took a look and randomly were like, yep, we're going to put these on there without doing any due diligence as to the award terms and conditions, checking with the agencies, any of that. So this is where our stance is. And I guess the last thing is, does anybody have any questions about this or want to discuss anything?
I don't even know where to begin.
Was anything unclear? I know it's a lot. I tried to break it down as succinctly as I could.
That was super, super helpful to break it down like that and to pull out the parts that would apply. I'm sure that with postdocs, there are a lot of similar things. So it would be interesting to see how much of it would apply to postdocs as well. But no, that's super helpful. And I think that addressing this would be important. I think that our graduate divisions, I don't know if they're represented here, but I think that the graduate divisions need to be totally aware of these issues because they're the ones that are telling faculty what they can and can't do as far as funding for the GSRs. And I've run into, that's part of my frustration is I'm running into graduate division coordinators telling me one thing and the T32 telling me a different thing. So I think making this clear and making it, finding a solution would be totally helpful.
Yeah. And the other piece is none of, as far as I am aware, none of the sponsored projects offices or offices of contracts and grants, whatever your campus calls it, they are unaware of this. I brought it forth to our sponsored projects and they had no clue.
Mm-hmm.
And
so, Elizabeth, how do you, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're so knowledgeable on this. And I'm applaud you, first of all, for understanding all this. Because it just worries me that like our campus isn't even, they don't even recognize there's an issue. So you know, going forward, I mean, I think that's an interesting stance that you're taking, but are we all going to be able to fall into that and take that stance? Or what do you, I mean,
Well,
what do
I
we
mean,
do?
I mean, you'd have to look at your programs, but I mean, very specifically, all of us receive stipends for our students that are not for wages. They are stipends. If the students don't complete the program, we don't take the stipends back, right? They're there. Like if they just suddenly decide, I'm not going to do anything, I'm not going to show up to these, there's nothing we can do. And that right there alone, as well as the definition of a stipend, would indicate that they are not GSRs. They're not producing a work product for financial gain. They are receiving a stipend. I'm not sure how other people have theirs set up. Our students are required to take a certain number of courses. We have different events for them to come to, professional development, you know, grant writing workshops. And then we have what we call lab explorations. And even if they already have been placed in a lab and have a PI, the whole entire point is for them to meet people in other labs, to learn new techniques that they might be able to use in their own research as they go forward with their degree. But again, there's no work product, you know, a typical GSR and a federal award is working towards a specific goal. They are receiving money for working on that and producing the research towards what was outlined in the proposal. They go on a very standard budget. Overhead is charged for wages, all of those things. That is not the case with any of these training grants.
The only place where it gets sticky is that additional amount to meet the requirement, and that percentage usually, for at least for the programs that I work with, they are required to do something for that amount, whether that amount is paid for by their mentor or paid for by a block grant or through the graduate division. There is some kind of requirement for that amount, whether it's being a TA or whether it's helping their mentor on some project. So I think that's where it's going to get sticky, dividing the two, because there is some requirement.
So that's the interesting part about that is, so it's kind of, I view it as two separate issues. Like there's the stipend for their training grant, and then there is the amount that we have promised to furnish them as part of their graduate degree. Now, if you are providing them with employment maximum of 25% as a TA or a GSR, not related to the training grant, so that you meet your obligations to them, that is separate from the training grant. It is not the same thing. And a TA is particularly easy to distinguish because you're like, no, that's a TA. It's not even related to research. And so as long as they're receiving their stipend over the course of the 12 months and being supported on the grant for the 12 months, that 25% employment is coincidental to it. It's not tied to the training grant, if that makes sense. We supplement ours in their first year so that they don't have to TA while they're doing their training grant. We use block grant, but again, nothing's required for the supplementation with either block grant, or we have cost share funds that we use as well. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. It's just going to be hard to say that they're not an employee if there is some small percentage that they are an employee, even if it's not part of the training grant stipend. So that's where we've gotten pushback.
So that's so that's a different thing. We don't care if they're doing coincidental employment that makes them an employee. That's not what the terms and conditions of the award are saying. They're saying that you cannot force the student to be an employee as part of their training grant, to supplement them if that's what you want to do, if you want to supplement it that way. A part of our argument too is that, well, if we have students who are on the training grant and they have a coincidental like 25% as a TA or something like that, then they're still covered under the union contract as an employee. It's not tied to their traineeship. They are still covered, but in the appropriate job title, not a supplement title. And so it's a non-issue. And again, we have no problem with the TAs being unionized or anything like that. We have a problem with the way they're trying to ramrod this supplement, tie it, and say that they must do this through employment, et cetera, et cetera. The coincidental employment, as long as it's not above 25%, should not be an issue. And then they're covered under the TA contract or the GSR contract.
I think having to separate out the two is where a lot of people in the graduate division, from my experience, are frustrated because they don't know how to separate out the two necessarily. There hasn't been good guidance on how to do that, or so they end up lumping them into one category. But I agree with you, there's so much ambiguity, and nobody really understands, and nobody really reads the contracts, so they're just trying to piece it all together. So I agree that this is an issue. I know that a couple. Go ahead.
Oh no, continue.
There were a couple questions in the chat, and one of them was, does this imply to postdocs as well? And postdocs are a whole different, in my experience, a whole different category and a whole different issue, because there's so many different little tiny things that you can run into that are exceptions, etc., for postdocs, that I wouldn't even say that they're the same at all.
My understanding.
And
oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I was gonna say, when you receive the slides, you can actually click on those links and go to the NIH terms and conditions, and you can look and see what they say about the postdocs.
Yeah, and from what I was told, the postdocs are exempt, so this doesn't apply to them. There's no issue with the UAW with them being so. But then again, I don't know what to believe, because I think I shared that answer with you the other day. I'm getting conflicting information. Melinda, did you have a question?
Well, I only deal with postdocs, with people who already have their PhD or MD. They're asking some regular, in intervals, they ask, why am I not being taxed on this? So this topic today makes me understand perhaps why that's happening.
Yeah, the postdocs receive a stipend as well. On a different level too, we actually did have a student come in on Friday who was very confused that he was asked to sign an appointment letter that included both his stipend for the training grant as well as work as a GSR, all rolled into one, and had like all of the rules and regulations regarding time cards, paid time off, all of this and that. And he's like, I thought my stipend was separate from this. And a lot of the students that we're seeing are starting to catch on to this. And they're like, I don't understand why is it not two separate things? And why am I being asked to fall under this? And we have to explain it to them. With regards to the disconnect, honestly, I lay this squarely at the feet of UCOP. Mainly labor relations, because they did not check. They told our campus that they had vetted this with the appropriate agencies, and they did not. That's obvious. Like NIH has never been contacted about this. NIH would not look at this and be like, yeah, sure, that's not a problem. But it's because it's a complicated issue, none of the appropriate parties are talking to each other and sitting down and saying, we need to sort this out. We need to figure this out. Like labor relations, grad div, payroll personnel, and sponsor projects kind of all need to be involved with this because it does involve every single person. We cannot be siloed about this. And, you know, 10 years ago, our campus had, you know, a standard NSF audit. And one of the biggest problems was effort reporting. And that's a whole nother ball of wax. And I'm not even going to get into right now with regards to calling them employees and requiring them to report effort. And it turned into an investigation from the OIG. And we got absolutely hammered. And I would also, coming from that perspective, really like to avoid running afoul of any audits that might come down or having our funding, you know, taken away from us. Like we could alert the agencies to this, but I don't want to at this point. I would rather see if we can work this out internally because I don't want them to potentially not, you know, fund our next year because we're not complying with the rules and regulations. So I think all parties need to be involved with this because, you know, to be honest, I don't expect grad div to know the nitty gritty details of the award terms and conditions of an NIH grant. And somebody who is inputting information into UC Path definitely wouldn't need to know terms and conditions of award, nor would they necessarily know all the rules and regulations from grad div and whatnot. And then again, also labor relations. But once they've been made aware of these issues, they should be addressed. And that's just not happening. We, quite frankly, have straight up told our campus that we are not going to do this because it is a violation of the award terms and conditions, because we do not believe that our students meet the terms of a GSR, therefore they are not a GSR trainee. See, Alex said, I unfortunately believe it will be through grievances mediation. Next round of contract negotiations, it will be clarified. Training grants are probably just the loudest canary in the coal mine. Alex, honestly, I don't know. As I said before, I had our campus, our bioengineering, we had a meeting with UCOP labor relations and people from our campus grad div and our campus labor relations. I'm not allowed to speak about it. They brought in a lawyer that said that we may not discuss anything that went on in the meeting. But I don't know that it would change anything, in all honesty, for the next contract. I don't.
This is
And
Alex
that's what
here.
scares me.
And I can chime in. When you shared last meeting, I wasn't surprised by your experience. Prior to my current role, I worked full-time in UCHR at a high level. And so I think, you know, as disheartening as it was, I won't lie, like what you shared was disheartening. And I think that that's an understandable sentiment across the board. But I can share from my personal experience, employee and labor relations doesn't consider it their responsibility to care about what we do. They consider, you know, protecting the entity that is the UC and ultimately helping do the calculations around what are gains and losses in the grand scheme of things. And so, yeah, I mean, I think even my comment, you know, has some optimism to it of, you know, ideally through grievances, mediation, having a voice at the contract table in some way or another would be the ideal. But I think also there needs to be the question of what closed doors conversations there have been around the cost benefit analysis of letting T32s wither on the vine, so to speak, right? Because then it wouldn't come from the UC, it would be coming from the NIH, where the NIH would be the ones giving each of us that renewal or resubmission, the news that unfortunately your program is no longer viable in your current campus climate. And so I think that is something that is kind of campus dependent, because I think that's what we're seeing, right? It's not a system supported environment anymore for these types of grants, but we are doing efforts at campus levels. And I can say at Davis, like the T32 Council here has been pretty good at channeling advocacy. And I know that there's efforts here, but I think that is an idea to entertain. Is it the ideal, mindset? Not at all. But I think to be fair about, I was told once, right, working in it for a grant based program, we're hunters. Maybe other entities are gatherers, but we have always from day one had to be on the hunt, right, through renewal. And so now, higher ed is completely changed, not just in this regard, but across the board. And so I think this is the period for innovation right next to that, staring at that reality that is in front of us.
Well, I have to go in 2 minutes, but I do want to say, yes, agree. And that's where I'm hoping that us as a group can maybe actually make some headway with this, coming together, joining our forces as a campus wide, with both showing the importance of the training grants and their added value, and then also educating them on the terms and conditions of awards, because cost benefit analysis too, yeah, we could get fined. We could be forced to pay back the money. And that's like a big issue. I mean, like with our NSF OIG, we were fined and had to pay back a lot of money. So that is something that we can directly, potentially point to as well. And I'm hoping, like I said, as a combined force, maybe we can tackle this and get to the right people that we need to say, like, hey, listen to us. We're not trying to mess things up. We're trying to make things easier and follow the guidelines so that we can all be on the same page and do the right thing, and we can all benefit, especially the students. Like, this is about the students. And we want to continue to provide the training grants and the extra experiences that our students need and deserve.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I know it's almost 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
So I appreciate coming, and I think hopefully we can work together and for some solutions here, for sure.
Yeah, and Vanessa put a comment in the chat as well. So that just,
Yeah, I can address it. I can stay on, but
I have to go.
Okay.
So,
But thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
So
Bye.
I know it's 3 o'clock, so I know some people might have to get off, and I'm just trying to think of like what action items can come of this. It sounds like we need to get people from different campuses on some sort of subcommittee to start talking about this, because I think the big thing is, who do we need to reach? Who do we need to approach about this issue? So anyway, anything else? This is Vanessa. I'm just reading Vanessa's comment. I don't know if she's still on yet. She is. We at UCSD have several active grievances that are starting to shape actions for the future, while other also receiving no help from GEPA, which is our grad division and labor relations here. Literally was told we should do what we think is best, and we just have to defend it later. So grad division and labor relations just want the departments to assume all risk and provide no guidance, and then later will support us if there's an issue. Sorry, that's
Yeah, I just wanted, that was exactly what they told us on Friday morning during office hours. They were like, it's not, it's up to each department how they feel they should handle a certain situation, and you just have to be able to defend it later. So, make sure your policy aligns with what the contract likely says. And we're like, okay, well, can you tell us what the contract says? And they're like, well, we feel like it's up to each department to just determine what it says for them.
Yeah, that's the issue that I am having right now is with our graduation. It's just, this is really, really disappointing that we're getting no direction and yeah, so. Anyway, I'll go ahead and stay. But I am gonna stop recording. If anybody else wants to